Hey guys, welcome to yet another video from SCALER. So in this particular session, we're going to look into Angular versus React. So both are JavaScript frameworks. We'll be looking into the differences between them. But before we move on with this particular session, please make sure to subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss our upcoming videos, and also leave a like if you enjoy our content. Now, without any further delays, we'll start off with the session, and before that, we'll also understand what exactly will be covered in this particular session. And also, guys, if you want a textual reference of what exactly will be covered in this particular video, Interview Bit has blogs on all these topics which we are covering. You can go ahead and check it out, and the link is provided in the description box below. So now let's understand what exactly will be covered in this session. So we'll start off with understanding what exactly is Angular and what is React, then look into the key features of Angular and React. Once that is done, we'll be looking into the differences between Angular and React, where we'll be comparing multiple topics and multiple features between Angular and React. So that once that is done, we'll be looking into the pros and cons of Angular and React, and that would be the final part of this particular session, right? So basically, this is what we'll be covering, guys. I hope everything is clear in this particular section. So now, before we move on, let's just understand what exactly we'll be doing. Basically, so web development is in the rise. Everybody is learning web development, and right now people are trying to learn JavaScript frameworks, and in the JavaScript ecosystem there are so many different JavaScript frameworks to choose from. So what exactly should you choose? So that's exactly why we've come up with this section, Angular and React. So we're gonna look into Angular and React and understand what exactly are the differences, and who should go for Angular and who should go for React in exactly what circumstances. So now, without any delays, let's begin with the session. So guys, let's start with the comparison, Angular versus React. So we know that Angular was really popular back in the day, even though current versions are coming out, Angular 12, 13, but still React is more popular currently because of its benefits that we'll be discussing in this session. But Angular is still popular, but back in the day it was even more popular. So that's the comparison which we are going to do today. We're going to look into Angular and React. First, we'll understand what is Angular, what is React, the key features of both of these frameworks, and then we'll do a comparison of Angular React, and then we'll just understand a few more details, and then that would be the end of this particular session, right? I've already told you what exactly will be covered, so now let's start with it. So first of all, let's understand what is Angular. So Angular is a Google developed and maintained web framework. So Angular is developed by Google and also is maintained by Google, right? So most of the Google softwares use Angular, Angular JavaScript, right? So it quickly became one of the most popular web frameworks at the time. So as I told you, back when it was released in 2010, it quickly became one of the most popular web frameworks at that particular time. So because it had lots of features like two-way binding, dependency injection, as well as that it was supported by a tech giant. So Google created this. That's why it had a lot of support, even though there were other JavaScript frameworks, but Angular was basically leading at that point of time, right? So there is a two-way binding which we'll be looking into, dependency injection which we'll be looking into. For now, just understand that Angular is a Google developed and maintained framework released in 2010, which is called Angular JS. Right now it's Angular. Before it was Angular JS when they were using JavaScript and not TypeScript. And yeah, so it was popular because of its capabilities like two-way binding, dependency injection, right? And then Angular, also known as Angular 2.0, was released in 2016. So Angular JS was redesigned into Angular and released as Angular 2.0 currently, but Angular 1.0 was released 2010. So Angular JS is basically Angular 1.0. After 2016, the second version which got released, which was called Angular, it's called Angular 2.0. So this is basically the info about Angular. Okay, so now let's look at the key features of Angular, right? So first of all, built-in support for Ajax, HTTP, and observables are just a few Angular highlights. There is widespread support in the community. So first of all, Ajax basically turned the game because you know what Ajax is. If you do not know, let me give you a brief. For example, let's say you're on Facebook and you're typing a comment to a particular post and hitting enter. If the entire page reloads in order to post your comment, would that be a feasible solution? It won't be, right? You don't want the entire page to reload just for your comment to go. You just want that comment to be right there. So you basically want just that particular part of your website to be updated. So that's where Ajax comes in. That's where what exactly Ajax helps you do. So using Angular, you will be able to do that. You will be able to just update one particular part of the web page. Then HTTP, it's a TCP protocol which is used for basically you can run a web server over it, and yeah, it's a transfer protocol. And then comes observables. So these are basically just few highlights, and in the community there are so much support for these, and also there are other support as well. So these are just the built-in support. There is also widespread support for all many other third-party tools as well. Okay, so in line with current technologies, TypeScript is time saving. So TypeScript is much better than JavaScript in terms for Angular. So that's why Angular JavaScript, which was called Angular JS, got termed into Angular, which was using TypeScript. Okay, so that then comes coding that is more clear and concise. So it you will be having multiple modules and everything will be, so let's say you're using an IDE, so everything will have its own purpose. Every single code file will have its own purpose. So everything is clear and concise. You don't have to basically confuse or jumble upon. Next comes error handling. Support has been improved. So yeah, so sometimes when you code, basically there are errors which has to be handled or which has to be cached before it goes ahead, right? So you error handling support has been improved. There are a lot of methods which you can use for error handling. And then comes CLI. So again, CLI, it's basically really helpful feature. So everything could be done using CLI. You don't have to use the IDE for anything. You can create an app, you can create modules, you can create, you can run the server, you can update the server, you can install packages, dependencies, everything via CLI without any need for the IDE or opening up a marketplace and downloading stuff. Nothing is necessary. Just type in the command, it'll do it all for you. Validation and forms. So forms, validation, all of these things are already available in Angular. You don't have to basically, how to say that? You don't have to create anything new. So yeah, using validation, you can basically validate the inputs which are coming into the forms, and it automatically gives you an invalid or valid status. So you don't have to worry about it. And then local CSS and shadow data object model. So both is available. So you can basically include the local CSS classes, and also a shadow DOM is available which you can use. And then finally, separation of user interface and business logic. So you will basically have to do two things, right? One is the UI of the application, and the second thing would be the business logic. That is, if you click on this button, what exactly will happen in the code, which particular function will be triggered, and so what exactly happens within that code. So you can basically have a clear separation of the UI and the business logic in Angular without having to do anything else. You can have different files, different types of coding schemes. You can have different types of, yeah, you can basically create multiple different modules, and within one module you can have all the uh, user interface files. Another one, you can have business logic files, or you can incorporate them together as well if you want. That's no issue. So these are the key features of Angular, guys. Coming to the next one, React. So React, it's a JavaScript library used by Facebook. Again, so that was created by Google. React is a library created by Facebook. So it was open sourced in 2013. Okay, so this particular framework was popularized a web development concept known as component-based architecture, which has a number of benefits, including, so first of all, yeah, so components that are modular and coherent, making them highly reusable and contributing to a faster development time. So basically, you can create components, right? So those components are modular. So basically, it doesn't overlap with anything else. There won't be any dependencies for it. So you will be able to reuse it whenever you need it, and that will result in a faster development time because you don't have to rewrite code. You can just use the existing ones. And also, it's used in mobile development since it allows developers to reuse the logical section of an app while simply changing the view. So basically, let's say you're creating a website using React, you can use the exact same code to use in a mobile application because you can just use the same code. You're just changing the view of the application, but the logic of the application remains the same, right? So you can see reuse the logical section of the app, right? The logical section of the app. That is what exactly happens behind it. So that can be the same. The functionality can be the same. You can use the same code, but you're just changing the UI to suit a mobile phone,
right? So these two, and finally, React immediately swept the market, overtaking most of the frameworks available at the time, including AngularJS. So React, once it came into, when it people saw it was lightweight and it was very quick to use than Angular, so it basically overtook the market of AngularJS, and also as a result of the community's passion for component-based architecture. So basically, Angular came up with Angular 2. So that's how their JavaScript framework was improved, and TypeScript was brought in, and Angular 2 was introduced in order to compete with React, basically. But React is still the like, let's say it's still even better than Angular, even though they made all those changes. Yeah. So now looking at the key features, include the ability to use third-party libraries. You can use third-party libraries in React. You don't have to just use the libraries which are inbuilt in React. Time saving. So we already discussed how composability and simplicity. It's pretty easy to put together. It's pretty simple for a beginner to go with than Angular. In Angular, it's pretty tough to start. Facebook is fully behind you, so you have your entire community support. Facebook community support for React, improved user experience and lightning fast speed. So if you are using Instagram or Facebook or WhatsApp or any app which Facebook provides, right, you would know how quick they are. So that's because of React. More rapid development, so development can be done faster, upgrades can be made faster. It's be really useful in a DevOps environment. One directional data binding provides code stability. So here two-way binding is not there, one directional data binding is there, but it will provide you code stability because only one part of the code will change, right? And then components in React. So components, as we discussed, components can be reused again and again because they are modular and very easy to create. And yeah, so these are the key features in React. So as of right now, we kind of know that React is better than Angular even before the comparison has started. So I hope you guys understood what is Angular and what is React, and understood the key features in both of them. So now let's start the comparison. We'll take certain aspects, that is purpose, data binding, language, UI components, dependency injection, and data objects model. Right? Let's start. Okay, so first of all, starting with purpose, Angular, it's a fully featured framework. It provides a strong opinion on how your application should be designed, as well as a number of tiny libraries that aid in the development of complex applications. Okay, so it's a completely featured framework with everything is available and put together. So you don't need anything else. If you use Angular, you just need Angular in order to create a complete application, which already has certain libraries which you can use to develop complex applications. So that's the purpose of Angular, to develop complex applications, and yeah, using whatever libraries they have. So everything is put together. You just have to use it. Coming to React, the library is only concerned with UI components, right? It's not concerned with the backend logic. So MVC design requires Flux to implement, but it provides you more flexibility in how you wish to organize your code. Okay, so basically, as its only concern is UI components, there is basically no connectivity between. You don't have to basically keep the backend, that's the business logic, and your UI components connected. They can be separate. So this gives you more flexibility on how to organize your code. And so with Angular, you can just use MVC, Model View Controller design. But in React, if you want to emulate the same MVC design, you would have to use Flux. Again, it is an application which is provided by Facebook, just like React, but it's a separate application which is provided by Facebook in order to contribute to the MVC design. But you can't use MVC design directly. You will have to use Flux in order to do it in React. So these are the purposes. So one is a fully featured framework, where you can do every single thing in a complex application with certain libraries. React is mainly concentrating on the UI components, and to enable MVC, you will have to bring in Flux, and then you will have more flexibility in order to organize your code structure. So these are Angular and React. So now coming to data binding. So in Angular, both one-way and two-way data binding is there. So two-way data binding basically means if you modify the UI input, so whatever is entering in the UI, so the model state will change and vice versa. So if something is changed in the UI, the model state itself will change. if you change it in the backend, so if something changes in the backend, even the input will be modified in the UI. So that's basically two-way binding. One-way binding basically means that the UI element can't affect a component state. So when anything input changes in the UI, it would not affect the component state. It will stay the same. So that's basically the difference between one-way and two-way binding. But in Angular, you can still go with one-way binding, but in React, two-way binding is not available at all. You can only use one-way binding. So to give a simple example for two-way binding, for example, let's say you have a in the website you have a small place where you can enter your name, right? So if you change the name here in your UI, that name will be changed in the component itself. In your code, that name would be entered, right? Once you remove that name will also be removed from the code. So this basically happens in two-way binding. But again, in the code, if you change the name, right, if you change the name in the code, it will also reflect in the UI. But so that is not really good for code stability, but it will be useful in certain cases, but it won't be good for code stability. One-way binding would be much better because you just want the input to change whenever you change stuff in your code, not the other way around, right? So that's data binding. Coming to the next part, language. So TypeScript is used completely in Angular. TypeScript is a statically typed language. It's a superset of JavaScript. So TypeScript has more features to it, but the underlying structure has JavaScript to it. Coming to React, TypeScript can write JavaScript XML, which is called JSX, although it isn't included by default. So you can use JavaScript itself. If not, you can use TypeScript, or you can also use JSX, which is it is another form of JavaScript, which is JavaScript XML. Yeah. Okay, it's not default. You can change the language, but it's not included by default. By default, it's TypeScript. UI components, material design components in Angular. Angular includes a number of material design components that make UI configuration a breeze. So you can basically install material design components in Angular, and you will get a list of material design components which you can include within your code in order to design your UI. Coming to React, so community developed UI tools provide a wide range of UI components. So the problem with Angular is they provide you a set of material design components which is built within Angular itself, which has to be installed. But in React, community can develop their own UI tools. So you can basically choose any tool which is available in the community, React community, and use it in your own code. So you don't have to basically just stick to what is provided within the material design components, right? So that's basically the only difference here. Coming to the next one, which is dependency injection. So dependency injection is supported in Angular, allowing for separate life cycles for different stores, but React does not fully enable dependency injection because each component has its own state. So it basically means dependency injection. One object is dependent on another object in order to do a particular what is that? Do a particular action. So only if this object changes the second object, the first object will be affected. So the first object will need the second object's input in order to work. So dependency injection is completely supported in Angular. You can have separate life cycles for different types of stores, but in React it's not completely enabled because every single component, right? Every single component is an individual and they have their own state. So if one component, when an object in one component changes, it wouldn't affect the other component. Yeah, so that is not possible. So this is basically dependency injection. Coming to the final part which we are comparing is DOM. So incremental DOM is in Angular, virtual DOM is in React. So incremental DOM, when a new data object model is created, it compares it to the previous one and applies the differences to the actual DOM, only allocating memory if necessary. For example, when you are creating something, a new data object model, so it basically compares itself with the previous data object model and checks what exactly is new in the new data object model, and it only allocates memory for the new part which have been included, and that's it. So it basically only creates allocates memory for them, and it basically lets it go. So incremental DOM, so again when you create another one, it again checks with the previous one and just allocates memory for the new one. If it's even smaller than that, then it wouldn't. So that's basically incremental DOM. And in virtual DOM, anytime the DOM changes, a new virtual DOM is created compared to the previous one, and only the differences are modified in the real DOM. right? So in virtual DOM, where anytime the data object model is changed, and a virtual DOM will automatically be created and it will compare itself with the real DOM, and only the changes which are made in the new DOM will be reflected. So in the real DOM, it will be attached to it. For example, if there are only two changes in the virtual DOM, only those two changes will be added, not the entire data object model will be recreated. Okay, so that's the same between both of them. The only difference is here it's an incremental DOM, here it's a virtual DOM. That's it. So these are basically the differences, guys. Okay, so now let's discuss the advantages and disadvantages of both of Angular and React. First, let's look into Angular. Okay, so first of all, in Angular, let's look at a pro, all the pros, and then come to all the cons. Coming to pros, so clean code development is available. So again, you can create individual modules for every single component you want to create, and that basically gives you a clean code development. That is, you don't have to create anything, you don't have to create multiple things, you can just use one single platform in order to work with. Increased efficiency. This could be said for multiple JavaScript frameworks, but it's a fully featured framework where everything is available in one single JavaScript framework, which can be used for everything. You can create complex applications with just Angular framework. So yes, efficiency is increased. Interface inspired by material design. So as I told you, material design is already available built in Angular, which can be installed and you can start using it, and you can create your complete user interface using material design components. Because an Angular framework can handle routing, switching from one view to another is simple. So basically routing is available in Angular, and basically Angular framework can handle a routing. So basically shifting from one view to another view of the look, it's much simpler. So that's basically what they're saying, because Angular is a single page application, right? Even React is a single page application. Single page applications in the sense there would be just one page for the web application itself, and any changes happens will happen in the same page itself. It won't basically so for example, when you create a PHP application, you will have index.php, let's say database.php. So you'll have multiple files. In this case, you wouldn't have multiple files, you will have just one single file which is divided into multiple components, right? So as it can handle routing, so it's changing from one view to another view wouldn't be a hassle. It will be a much simpler process. Um, Angular CLI for seamless updates. So again, Angular CLI, I already told you, command line interface is available. Anything you want to install, anything you want to do, everything can be done with CLI commands. So these are the pros of Angular. Coming to cons, the first con is really true. For a newbie, it could be perplexing. Learning Angular features can be perplexing. So perplexing basically means it'll be really complex, because there are so many things, so many layers to Angular which you'll have to understand. So it'll be really hard for a new person who hasn't had any experience in any JavaScript frameworks to understand Angular. It'll be really tough, right? Yeah, but anyway, it could be learned, but it'll be quite confusing. Coming to the next part, which is limited routing, makes it difficult to debug scopes. Again, so routing is available, but it's limited. So to debug certain scopes, to change views, it'll be quite hard. Coming to the next point, when pages have interactive components, Angular can become slow. So when there are more interactive components, when there are more dynamic elements in a web page, let's say an image is moving, there are more dynamic elements. So basically hovering, when you take your mouse over something, the color changes or the view changes. So all of these, when more of these components are enabled, right? So this basically will make your application slower because of lots of dynamic elements. Coming to the fourth point, integration with third parties is extremely tough. So again, as we were discussing about React, there is a complete community, but in this case, you already have certain libraries and certain things which are already available in Angular, which you'll have to install and use. But connecting them with a third party would be extremely tough, because I said it's not meant for it. They already have things which you can include. But again, it's not always necessary that you just want to use whatever library they've provided. You might also want to use, let's say you are creating your own library and trying to embed it. It'll be a quite tough task, but you will still be able to do it. But it's still tough. And finally, several complications may arise when upgrading from earlier versions to newer versions. That is, let's say you're using Angular 10 and you've been using Angular 10 for multiple years, and now Angular 11 has released, 12 has released, let's say 13 is releasing. So now you want to shift to Angular 13 right now. So your entire company wants to shift to Angular 13 right now, but that shifting process will be quite tough because there will be lots of new changes, and sometimes compatibility will be a major problem in Angular, right? Yeah. So these are the pros and cons. So now let's look at the pros and cons of React. Okay, so first of all, it's straightforward design, simple to learn because it's basically concentrated on UI components. It's not a complete package. You just have to learn one particular part. So it's pretty straightforward. You can start to learn it easily. Second, developers can spend less time worrying about framework specific code and more time writing current JavaScript. They can just use current JavaScript. They don't have to particularly write in framework specific code, which happens in Angular a lot. That's why it's quite hard to shift from one version of Angular to the next version of Angular. React allows you to migrate between versions, so that's much easier to migrate between versions than Angular. The React skills can be transferred into native development. So native development is basically for mobile React native. So if you know React, you know how to create web applications. React skills can directly be connected to React Native skills because it's the same. The only difference will change is the UI components. So the way you're designing the UI will be different, but other than that, everything would be the same. Facebook has a feature called Code Mod that automates a lot of the process. So Facebook are constantly working on this feature called Code Mod. So it'll automatically trying to automate lots of processes, which will make it much easier for you to develop applications in the long scale. Because you don't want to enter every single thing, right? If Code Mod is available, it can automatically detect something, and it can automatically fulfill some of your tasks, which are without even you having to type that entire thing. Coming to the cons of React. So integrating React with a typical MVC framework like Rail necessitates a lot of setup. If you're going with Flux, it's fine. If you're not using Flux, Flux is basically an MVC framework provided by Facebook themselves. But if you're not using Flux and let's say you want to use Rails, in that case, it needs a lot of setup. It's quite a hassle in order to do that. So that's not a problem with Angular because you can directly use MVC, it's already available. But in React, if you're not using Flux, then it will be a major problem. Coming to the next part, users using React.js would need a thorough understanding of how to integrate a user interface with the MVC framework. So in Angular, everything is packaged together. So you don't have to do anything, it'll automatically use the MVC framework. But when it comes to React, in order to integrate your UI, which you create with React, with MVC framework, you need a complete understanding of how exactly to do that. For that, you will have to put in a lot of effort and learn and understand even better. Even though the main part that is creating is easy, the MVC and connecting it to frameworks which are not of Facebook's is a little bit difficult on the difficult side. So these are basically the pros and cons of Angular, guys, Angular and React. So I hope everything else is clear. What is Angular, the key features, React key features, the differences between Angular and React, and the pros and cons. So this is what we wanted to cover in this particular session. I hope you guys have understood whatever we wanted to cover. I hope you guys have understood the differences between Angular and React. So you can choose either of them. Choose whichever one would be suitable for you, right? But if you want to build a really good UI uh, without having any other experience in any other framework, just go with React. But if you want to create a complete application and if you have enough time, if you want to create a complete application, then go with Angular. Both are really good frameworks, but there will always be limitations with every single framework which is available. That is Vue.js, right? That is Redux. So every single framework will have its own limitations. So it doesn't matter which framework you choose. It matters in certain cases. For example, if you want to build a really good UI, go with React. If you want to go build a complete application without having to use a lot of external third-party libraries, then go with Angular. But other than that, there is not much to look into. Just understand what exactly you want to do and see if that particular framework allows you to do that, and then choose that particular framework to create your project. So I hope everything else is clear, guys. So I hope everything else is clear, guys. So thank you so much for attending this session. Meet you in another one.